Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Plant Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide on this journey, and this week we have a special episode. I have invited Dr. Ryan Westrum back on, one of the authors of the Psychedelic Integration Handbook, and we're going to dig deeper into just what integration is, because the term is thrown around a lot and it's very important, but coming from my own experience, I was not sure until I got my own integration coach, which is Ryan, exactly what integration entails. And so if you are in that same boat, knowing that this is an important thing, or maybe if you don't know it's an important thing, let us illustrate why for you. But that's what we're going to be discussing, kind of the nitty gritty, what goes on in integration. Now, before we get to Ryan, just a few quick things. First off, the Psychedelic Medicine Association has launched. We are live. So if you are a clinician and you want to learn more about psychedelic medicines and how to incorporate them into your own practice, or if you are a primary care doc and just wanting to know how to refer to other psychedelic practitioners or what is ketamine good for, anything along those lines, please join us over at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. And secondly, our disclaimer, as always, is that everything here on the Psychedelic Medicine, nope, that's not the name of the podcast, on the Plant Medicine Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here is to be construed as medical or legal advice. And finally, today's episode is being sponsored by Octagon Biolabs. You know, you've heard me speak about them many times. Organically grown hemp, full spectrum CBD products that you can now get in soft gel format, in case you not so fond of the hemp taste like I am not, but really still want some good quality and high dose hemp, high dose CBD oil. So head on over to octagonbiolabs.com if you'd like to give it a try. And if you use the code PLANTMEDICINE, you'll get 20% off. Again, that is octagonbiolabs.com. Use the code PLANTMEDICINE for 20% off. Now, real quickly before we start, for the hundreds of people who heard last week's episode, prior to the one person whose name is Max, that kind soul wrote into me and told me that I had left a number of errors in the introduction. Because I edit my own podcasts, and with the launch of the Psychedelic Medicine Association and many other things that were going on, I clearly missed some errors. And first off, massive thanks to Max. And secondly, thanks to everybody else who gracefully kept listening to the episode despite me having clearly suffered like a minor seizure in the middle of it. But that happens to be one of the things that I think Ryan and I are going to talk a little bit about in our discussion today, because we're going to chat about how things you learn in these psychedelic journeys, we can work them in through integration to apply them to situations in your real life, like when you find out that hundreds of people just heard you put out a very flawed episode of the Plant Medicine Podcast. So bringing him on, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Westrum.
Thank you, Lynn Marie, and I am deeply honored to be here.
I'm really excited for this chat because I'm going to be very transparent and open and say that, here I am. I founded plantmedicine.org. I host this podcast. I run the Psychedelic Medicine Association, and I had not previously hired an integration coach. And I think many of us that are, so enmeshed in this industry, we might think, well, we know what the tools for integration are. We should just be able to apply them ourselves. And I have found that to be not the most effective method. And so I decided, when I went to a psychedelic journey recently, a ceremony recently, and I was learning some of the same lessons I learned in past ceremonies, I realized, the medicines are going to keep telling me until I fully integrate it. So I got Ryan on board, and I figured this would be a great time to chat about what that looks like for people. And so Ryan, can you start by telling us a little bit about what integration means?
Thank you. I think that's a huge loaded statement in today's culture. Integration is woven into so many different nuances in our world, not just within psychedelic work. Integration to me is the act of taking one thing and another and finding wholeness or links to wholeness. And that can be through action, that can be through behaviors, that can be through motivations, that can be through cognition. And what we need to do is we need to really kind of funnel it into an opportunity to work step by step incrementally towards something. And one of my mentors, Stanislav Grof, has used the term wholeness. So I've adapted that as well. Integration to me, in a very elementary sense, is an active way of seeking wholeness.
I love that definition, because I think you and I have been talking a little bit before we started. There's kind of this feeling like one thing happens when you're in the psychedelic world and you're in those ceremonies and you feel like you're in a different place, and so many things make total sense in that place. and then you come back and things do not look the same. You don't look around your apartment all the time thinking everything is love. And like, it would be nice to make some whole version of you that can incorporate both of those. Is that part of what integration tries to achieve?
Without a doubt, and I love that you say it because we have a real tendency to want to take everything literally. And one of the biggest things I state from the onset of working with my clients is we can take certain things as figuratively as literally, but we really want to make it our own and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is tangible. And the word I like to use quite often is, Lynn Marie, how can we make this tangible?
Yeah, I think that's huge because, like, we'll start using some examples from our time working together. I recently did an ayahuasca ceremony and I learned some lessons that felt like if I could incorporate these, if I could really, let's say, integrate them into my life, then my whole life would look different. And there would be, let's say, less anxiety. And then, as Ryan knows, I come back from this retreat and, excuse me, a few days later, I have anxiety again. And it's like, oh, did everything in the retreat fail? Why didn't I integrate these lessons? And so, Ryan, how do people start the integration process? Because I know it's probably a little jolting if other people like myself, if they don't have an integration coach like holding their hand the minute they get back home, there may be like an adjustment period where you aren't feeling whole. Those two worlds seem very much at odds with each other.
Without a doubt. And the first and foremost thing to do is get into the elements of your five senses. And I would encourage someone to think about that as one of two ways. You can look at it as making sure you're grounding. In the psychedelic world, we talk about how are we grounding? And that can be through aligning your sensations, aligning your smells, aligning your tastes, making sure sound quality. And it sounds very simple. Yet, Anne Marie, it's one of the things we take for granted immediately after a long weekend in ceremony with ayahuasca or psilocybin. Immediately, that synesthesia kicks in through those ceremonies. And what I remind people of is let's get grounded, let's get formulated in these five senses to make sure physically we're not off. Before we can tackle anything emotionally, cognitively, or psychologically, I want to make sure that people are physically like embodied. Are you eating okay? Are you sleeping okay? Are you drinking water? Are you participating in your everyday life? Once we get there, that's when we can start tackling, oh, what was the information delivered to you?
Now, you brought up a good point because I think, especially, something that's as taxing on the body as ayahuasca, when you come back, I mean, it's taxing because you're probably purging, et cetera. You may be up through the night, your sleeping schedule's a little off, and the medicine, while it does have neuroregenerative benefits and all these good things, it can definitely have some effects on your system that may not seem like they are beneficial. They may not feel that comfortable at the time, but it may still be the medicine working through you. What do you recommend for people that are in that period? Because you would recommend it to me over and over to be gentle with myself.
Yeah, and that's my broken record, and thanks for saying that. So, outside of just simply being gentle with yourself, I want to paint the picture too. So, what we have to look at is how deep did we go? How a lot of people, such as yourself, were very versed in this medicine work. Some people that are completely new to this medicine work don't have a comparison or contrast. So, when you ask me, be gentle with yourself, and when I started telling that to you, I'm asking you really to take stock. Please take stock in what your day was, what your life is like, what it used to be like. And this starts way back in intentional setting and preparation. So now I'm going to convolute the story and not make it more dicey, but we have to do that way back before we're even evoking or taking the invitation of the ceremony or the treatment. We have to know what my litmus test is. Where do I stand? And that's an invitation for two reasons. One, it's great to be in your body, great to be in your cognition. And the secondary thing is then you have, okay, what's shifted in me since the medicine? What's shifted in me since the ceremonies or treatments? So we have this ability to start internally comparing and contrasting.
I like that. And something that came up with those kind of the, like the sensations and the things that were causing us to have this conversation about gentleness, I was having a lot of, physical discomfort in different ways. And that's one of the things that in my ceremony, I had had many lessons around not being worried about physical discomfort and having more of a mindset of gratitude. And this is where I come to Ryan and I say, like, I was taught these lessons and I thought that, like, I embodied them. I saw ayahuasca rewiring my nervous system, like, in my visions, and, like, I was going to be ready to live from gratitude and I wasn't going to worry about little physical discomforts. And here I am, super upset that I, like, have GI distress and I'm afraid I've got the coronavirus and all this stuff. And Ryan comes in and suggests, first off, that it could still be the medicine. But what I appreciated about that is that you took what we were working with and you just didn't take it at face value, because you dug deeper into, like, what those physical discomfort symptoms meant to me. And I felt like that's an important part of integration, because we may be seeing in our visions or what we hear from Mother Ayahuasca or whatever medicine is talking to us, like you said, maybe very literal things, but there may be something deeper. And is that part of what integration digs out?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And what you're alluding to is making it your own. So when you talk about what GI symptoms meant to you and what I was evoking within you, isn't just the idea of directly what it physically represented, but also metaphorically, symbolically. And so now we're weaving and we're starting to build the foundation and the upward evolution of integration in, hey, now I start to see the patterns, the potential themes. And I'd like to digress for 30 seconds and with Mother Ayahuasca, so someone might see the jaguar or someone might see a python or a snake. Well, everybody's internal vision of that is going to manifest differently. And that in and of itself is your own personal integrative process. You have to, if it doesn't resonate with you, that's another misnomer of integration. If by doing 16 yoga classes in a week doesn't resonate, please don't do those to think you've hit an integration pinnacle, right?
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point, because, myself included, a lot of people seem to equate integration with just self-care, whereas self-care seems to be just like the baseline so that you can integrate. It is not the integration process itself, correct?
Super valid, and I would endorse that 100%. Self-care is different than psychologically, emotionally, because then it becomes actually, and this is a little bit of a sell, or a sell from my vantage point, it could seem a transition or a fulcrum into real therapy. All of a sudden, we're not talking about the psychedelic sessions anymore. All of a sudden, we're not talking about what manifested in treatment or ceremony. Really, what ends up becoming super valuable is the links that the psychedelic session brought to you and potentially past memories of your life or biographical future stories. And I always evoke that. And it's challenging for some because they want to stick and hone it. Well, this is what ceremony taught. This is what ceremony taught. But on the contrary, it's an invitation to look at you reconciling your past and incrementally preparing yourself for your future. I'm going to say that again. It's reconciling past memories and incrementally getting prepared for future stories. And I think that's what incremental integration works with.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. You come back from these ceremonies with these lessons. At least for me, I get very clear lessons, and they're so intellectually, cognitively obvious that the part of my brain that is only brain, the thinking part is just like, well, duh. But that isn't, that's not how we function. Like, say something makes us nervous and we know it's not a thing we need to be afraid of. Just continuously knowing that doesn't somehow take away that fight or flight when it pops up. And so I think that's a lot of kind of the chasm that you help bridge with integration, is like, in the medicine, things seem so obvious. They're like, this is why every part of your life happened, and this is why you should never feel shame about any part of it that happened. And yet you come out of it, and it's not like shame is just an example from our sessions, but it's not like the shame is just suddenly wiped away. It's like, but hold on, I thought it was wiped away in the ceremony. Why did it pop back up? And I think some people might even get a little bit disheartened with psychedelic journeys when they feel like they see this, here's the golden ticket I was given and I came back and the golden ticket's now like kind of rusty, and what happened to it?
Right. And what I'm hearing you say is something that I always evidently try to kind of help people with is, okay, imagine standing at the shore of an ocean, and again, metaphors might help certain people. You can go as far out as you want or as deep as you want. In more cases than not, we're going to hit a limitation of understanding, of appreciation. And now we start to talk about, okay, do we need another session? Do we need another therapeutic treatment? Do we want to go to another ceremony? So now, if we take it as far as we can, there's opportunities to say, oh, have I limited my approach? Many people, such as yourself, and I'm very grateful that you brought the attention to integration coaching, is need someone else to kind of remove the blinders for you, to give you the opportunity to say, hey, have you thought about it in this way? It's not to take your ceremony and to hijack it. It's actually just to kind of offer suggestions. And that's another key aspect is you don't have to own anything that you got from it. It might just be a placeholder for the next opportunity.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Something that occurred to me to ask because when we had you on before, I was going through your handbook and there were a lot of things like draw mandalas and maybe journal. Like, where do the things that you mentioned, are the things in the handbook ways that people can be try to help integration on their own, or are they things that will help if they get a coach? Like, where do those kinds of exercises fit into this?
It's a great question. And the idea is it becomes a conduit to your work. So not everyone is going to draw mandalas. They might feel intrinsically embarrassed because of their art skills, or they might not resonate with journaling. And so where they enter in for people is simply, just like you said, an invitation to start the process. I believe it's a process of unfolding. It's a process of trying on different hats. I think it's a process of ruling out things. And what I mean by ruling out, as a doctor, you can appreciate, you got to look at what's not there and what's potentially symptomatic. And then you can say, hey, I really like doing this. Another opportunity that the exercises in the book do is they give you a way to do both right brain and left brain hemisphere type things. They challenge you intimately of doing something that you're not comfortable with. I believe that's also integration. I laughed about the yoga classes, but oftentimes we go to what we know because it's safe. Integration exercises can also challenge you to see what you're afraid of, what you're not ready to look at, what potentially are growth points. So all those exercises evoke an entry or an invitation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. And something else that occurred to me while you and I were working in our sessions together is how, like you just said, this may be like a conduit to therapy. And I think a lot of us, luckily, obviously this is changing drastically, but we associate therapy as a thing you do for a condition, right? As opposed to, like, say, I don't know many of us that have absolutely nothing that we are working on, but even if that person imaginarily existed and they go to do a ceremony and they find out, like, oh, maybe I have these limiting beliefs, like, they can still benefit from the therapeutic aspects of integration. How, if at all, do you see integration and therapy is different? Is it just that the integration side is definitely more aware of what's probably gone on in the psychedelic journey versus a traditional therapist who may be less aware?
Yeah, and that leads into somewhat of a moral dilemma, I think, from my vantage point, because what I'm hearing, people come to me are afraid to talk about their position around psychedelics. So there's a both. To answer the question really quick and directly, it's both. I think therapy is separate from integration work and it's together. And it really makes me revisit the idea of safety. If the client is exploring, and my deep respect for them, ceremony or therapy underground, there's certain therapists that just aren't qualified to talk about it, nor maybe they bring judgment into it because they induce it as drug induced or hallucinogenics that then manifest as schizophrenic tendencies. And to feel that is most important. And when I say that, it's safety. And they'll be able to branch out into therapy. They'll be able to then start building a rapport with the integration therapist. But it takes a real special relationship. And I evoke that all the time. It's relationship first before we even talk about any subject matter.
Yeah, I can imagine that like this is one of the themes that comes up in everything we discuss. Please make sure that the person facilitating your ceremony makes you feel safe and has a good you felt like you could make a good relationship with that person. Same with your integration coach.
Yeah.
Same with the, if you're journeying with other people, make sure that that environment feels safe. There's so many things. Almost, I'd say every part of a psychedelic healing journey, safety is very key in not only getting the best outcome, but for assuring that not there's this is a wide open area for your brain that you want to make sure that that wide openness is safe. With lots of other things can happen, interesting spirits can show up, and you want to make sure that there are trained people around so that you and your psyche can stay safe as possible.
Yeah, so I use a little brief acronym, and that safety acronym is you have to feel secure. It has to be accessible. There should be fluidity. The therapist or integration coach should give empowerment to the client. There is an opportunity for transformation. And lastly, as I allude all the time, is make it yours. So it's yours. The why is yours. And when you think about security, accessibility, fluidity, transformation, empowerment, and making it yours, there becomes this relationship built between the client and the therapist, or the client and the integration coach, that can be very, very profound.
Yeah. And I'm thinking here, like, if somebody's listening and they haven't done a psychedelic journey and they think, well, why wouldn't I just go to therapy? Like, we thought the journey was supposed to be 20 years of therapy in one night. Why would I still need a coach after? Or could I just go straight to therapy and not have to do the journey? At least what I've experienced in our working together is that I had 20 years of therapy in the one night, in that the things that came up I don't know how long it would have taken a regular therapist to get to. So it was like, here are some major keys to whatever mental distress I have. And then it feels like I can hand those keys to you, the integration therapist, and then you can work with them much more easily than if we'd spent the same, say we'd worked together for years and you were still trying to dig for those keys. So it seems like that's kind of how the two intersect. Like, yes, you may get 20 years of therapy in one night, but what if you needed 21 years? Like there's still that
Without a
little bit
doubt.
extra.
Yeah, and I think at that point too, and I loved your disclaimer at the beginning of the radio show, is the idea that we have this idea that we can do it all on our own. And thinking that we can do it all on their own is such a fallacy, myself included. I would never encourage anyone, no matter how many sessions you've sat, or how many ceremonies, or how many cups of tea you've drank, to do this on your own. There's a benefit in community. There's also a beautiful benefit in sharing and being witnessed. And so, if there's anything that I endorse, it's being witnessed for that humanistic experience, because all relationships build wounding and all relationships build healing. And so, if we can bridge that gap, it's easier to do, right? It's very easier to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there ever other modalities that you refer people to? Like I'm trying to, I had this conversation on, I believe, Educate, Inspire, Change the other day, but when I used to have an issue with 5-MeO DMT, when I would take it, I would end up just getting this like pain in my heart, and like finally somebody kind of adjunctly had talked about an energy healer, and like I'm a Western trained doctor, so it was definitely the biggest stretch ever to like do energy healing via Skype. However, I learned a lot. I actually like at some point felt this blockage move. Are there times when you refer to other types of healers in integration?
Without a doubt. And I think it brings up a valuable point. Intuitively, things will start manifesting in therapy or integration sessions. And it will be then an introduction to a conversation of, say, maybe people are stuck in the body. So, as you said, somatic healing or energetic healing. Or say there's been a situation where there's a cognitive block or a negative thinking that is still continuing. Maybe a dialectical behavioral therapist or some more cognitive behavioral therapy. One thing that I can't hide is a significant draw to listening to the client and then exploring what they feel comfortable with. It's all consent, another word that needs to be happening. So if they resonate with cognitively processing, it's an and or. I don't want to force them into physical behavior modification or energy healing if they need to get a benchmark and to grapple with it through CBD, like, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What kinds of things, if when people are integrating, just so that they have you've sent some exercises to me in between our sessions. What other kinds of things, outside of, because I mean, that's something that I would say a therapist has not necessarily done is like, 2 days later, here's an exercise you could do. What are some of the like adjunct things that you recommend for clients that help them along this process?
Great. When I did that specifically, I want to address the idea that integration is continuously incrementally. So I don't want to forget that. I don't want to compartmentalize it and say, hey, we're going to talk for 60 minutes. So by inquiring these peripheral conversations through email or through messaging, it evokes that feeling spontaneous. And so, what I'm addressing in your question is not ignoring the spontaneous catalyst of anything, being aware of synchronicities, as Carl Jung calls them, being mindfully present to, oh, that's a coincidence. Maybe it's feeling again, and it's bringing us back into the process of the therapy, of the integration. Some adjunct things to do are always play with the idea of journaling, doodling words. I evoke the idea of symbolism. So maybe there's a color that keeps coming up. Maybe dreams, monster fan of dream analysis. It starts to sound, and I'm already laughing at myself, that it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's not what I'm saying. I simply ask you to prescribe some time to put aside to revere it, to really make it important, because that's why we're diving into these medicines.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like I said before, if you don't put in a little bit of time to give the ceremony you just went into the time it needs to be reviewed and analyzed, then you may be in that situation that I found myself in is just every ceremony you hear some of the same lessons because do you want to go to another ceremony and hear the same lessons or would you like to learn some new ones? I would like to learn some new ones. So that is my impetus now for realizing like, let's actually get this integrated with help. So many times, like you said, we all think we can do it ourselves, especially the overly analytical ones like I could just analyze this to death, I'm good. No. It helps. I mean, I've gotten so much out of our sessions together, things that sometimes it's just the permission. Like I think, well, I was feeling fine the 2 days after ceremony, so if I'm feeling GI distress now, well, clearly something else is wrong. Like I need the permission from another person sometimes to be like, no, you're allowed to take a few more days off. You're allowed to keep processing this medicine. And I think that's really helpful for maybe the high achieving, hard driving set that they do a ceremony because they want to level up. And then if they're not feeling so leveled up afterward, it may take somebody like yourself to help them realize that that's not some kind of flaw in their system.
Yeah, and I think it begs the question of consumption. And I know in some circles of our communities with psychedelics, people will say, oh, how often can I do it? And that leads to healthy integration as well, is where's the space between to process? And you said an awesome, what's the permission I give myself not to keep consuming?
Yeah, I think
And
that's a
it's
great point.
vital.
Yeah.
It's super vital.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's not like the more ceremonies you do, the more therapy you've just gotten. If those have never been integrated, that therapy is just kind of flowing out the window. At least it was in my case. It's and at some point, I mean, I've had people come to me and they said I did too much ayahuasca. Like I feel like my psyche's kind of fractured. Like if you don't come back and put things together before your next journey or your next set of journeys, I'm guessing that's more likely to happen.
Yeah, because we all need our zip code, right? And I'm saying it comically, but Lynn Marie, it's a real tragedy in today's psychonaut culture is, like you said, leveling up or making it bigger or considering that well, at some point we're going to get resentment towards even the medicines that they keep showing us or why aren't I learning? And it could be a shame cycle or a complete negative loop that says, I'm not good enough. Well, step away for a minute and just evaluate. Maybe it evokes some therapy. Maybe it evokes some processing and chewing on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a question. When do you recommend people start working with an integration coach? Would you recommend that they start prior to the journey?
Yes, 100%. And this is to endorse the idea of appropriate preparation. And it evokes the idea that, hey, am I doing this with intent? Why am I doing it? And it gives an appropriate integration therapist the opportunity to be devil's advocate and saying, can you share with me the what's, the how's, the where's, the when's? And it gives them, the client, a clear opportunity to say, I'm prepared or I'm not. I don't ask the why. One questions I never ask is why. It's what, where, when, and how. And that's going to help formulate. I have so many tragedies of people calling me from Costa Rica or coming back from Peru, and they're like, "Oh, I'm trying to put myself back together," and more power to them that they did but there needs to be a purpose-driven motivation for this work. Just because it's being talked about in corners doesn't mean it's necessarily right for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I love kind of the let's talk about the intentions beforehand and that's sounds like what you work through because I've seen those that they may come with an intention, but on top of that intention is the go hard intention and they suffer so badly. And
Right.
they don't have like psychedelics often try to dissolve our ego, but the ego is still well in place when we decide how many cups to drink or how many grams to take. And I think that's something that having a person on your side with preparation could really help you kind of tease out.
Without a doubt, and I don't believe it's me being a gatekeeper or any psychedelic integration therapist to be a gatekeeper. It's just, a prudent opportunity to check in, to reconcile again motivations, intent, and ultimately there's a lot that can be squeezed out, as you know, and are you ready for it? So it could be just as simple as someone saying, "Hey, what's it like?" And then the appropriate integration therapist can kind of paint the picture of the possibilities to consider. So they know that I talk about the psychedelic integration handbag, and the handbag being, what is it that you might need, What is it that secures you,
Yeah, it's
keeps
a
you
good point.
tethered?
Yeah, like breath work or some other techniques when things start getting a little rough. That's a great, I like that, the psychedelic integration handbag. Well, Ryan, this has been super helpful. I've loved working with you. I'm very grateful for all the skills that you have brought to our sessions together. And thank you so much for all the knowledge that you've brought to this podcast and helping people understand this really important area of psychedelic healing. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm a clinical therapist in Minneapolis, and I offer integration coaching throughout the country. And my address is Healing Souls, SOULS, LLC.com. And you can also get a hold of me at Ryan Westrum at gmail.com. And we'd love to answer any questions or build dialogue with you.
Awesome. And we'll also put a link to your book in the show notes and all that. Thank you again, Ryan, for being with us.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. All right. For everyone else out there, until next time.